Well, good evening, everybody. I'm going to say hello to you while Tom's still back there collecting money and doing the things he's doing. And I just want to welcome you here tonight. Glad you were able to come out this evening. Just like we have a good crew here this evening. And we have one of our favorite speakers here who comes and talks to us once or twice a year, thank goodness, and always shares his words of wisdom with us. You know, a lot of us know of Tim as just being a person that worked out at LTV, but as I recall, he also went over to East Texas State when it still was that, and did his PhD, and he was a teacher. So when he stands up here in front of the microphone and talks to us, he's sort of been taught to do that, right? In a way. Communicate, and he does that, and we appreciate that very, very much. And I just want to, I did it last week, and I don't usually do it every 2 weeks, but I want to remind you, and then I'll sit down and shut up, and Tom should be ready to go. Remind you that we're glad to have you here. If you're not a regular and you're here for the first time, the restaurant's very kind to us. They take good care of us back here in a room that's sometimes a little hot in this new building we're in. I'm sorry about that. They've been working on it. It was a little cooler when I got in here tonight. The servers are the owner's daughters. So if you treat an owner's daughter bad, guess what? Daddy's probably gonna know that. I don't want to say that, but I do that. So treat them nice. They treat us nice. They work their butts off in here for us. Usually just one of them working the place, taking care of all of us. And they're pretty darn good at doing it. So please think of that when you order your food and you reward them for taking such good care of us. Again, we're glad to have you here tonight. Hope you enjoy our speaker. I know you will. You might even hear a little bit of a musical sound come out of his mouth. Maybe. Tom, it's all yours.
We're down to one mic anyway. Welcome to the College Complexes. This is our 426th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. Our speaker has to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. Give our speaker an hour to make a presentation. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. And we enforce it anyway. Then we have questions and answers of the speaker from the audience, not speeches. Questions and answers of the speaker. And then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium and respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have announcements? Come on up here. Make your announcement. Give you a chance to get this out of your bloodstream already.
This is just slightly longer than an announcement, but it does not pertain to Jean's topic tonight, so I thought I would go ahead and do it now and get it out of here. I've been doing some research on hate speech and hate crimes, and thinking that some of the stuff that I was hearing was that on the news, and I found out that it's not against the law to have, almost never reported hate speech in America because they don't prosecute for it. It's very hard to prosecute. But anyway, in the process, I ran across the Southern Poverty Law Center website, and I found this on the website this week. This is a letter that John David Carruthers wrote to send out from jail. My brothers in Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, the letter begins, my name is John Carruthers. I believe the Bible is about white people and for white people. I am in the Rutherford County Jail for burning a black man. I set him on fire with lighter fluid poured over his head. Jail employees intercepted the letter to an unnamed white supremacy group. The website said that some of these groups are infiltrating some of the churches. And That's part of the reason I mentioned this. Tennessee has no hate crime laws. He was charged with murder, arson, and 17 counts of reckless endangerment. There were other people around that could have been murdered. He could face federal charges. He had been arrested March 17th. No federal hate crime charges have been initiated at this time. And hopefully it's because they're doing a thorough investigation and not just ignoring it. But how many of you heard this on the news? Not a word. It happened in March.
Not a word. Thank you. Not a word.
Any other announcements? Anybody else have an announcement they want to make? Now's your chance. No announcements? All right. Come on up here. Yeah, come on up here.
I don't have all the details properly.
It's all right. Come on up and make your announcement. We want to hear it.
Kim Olson, who's running for Ag Commissioner, is a really, really good speaker, and she's having a happy hour on September the 10th in the evening, and I don't have a lot of details, but if you are interested enough, you could probably find out.
We don't have a speaker for next week yet. If somebody wants to volunteer, let me know. We're open for suggestions.
How about you?
How about me? Oh, I don't know. Anyway,
Tim and Tom usually don't.
huh?
I just said Tim and Tom usually don't.
Yeah, usually don't. Anyway. Anyway, if anybody knows of somebody want to be a speaker next week, let me know. And we'll schedule it.
But I keep the notes.
On September 15th, we have ethical issues in genetic medicine with Professor Ramel, PhD. That's on the itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. And anyway, it's that time of year where we got to get more speakers. So anybody wants to do it, let me know. And our speaker tonight is he's going to talk about our struggle must go beyond elections. Our speaker is Gene Lantz. He's a longtime labor activist from UAW 848, where he's on the executive board as president of Retirees, recording secretary, archivist, and editor. He serves the Dallas AFL-CIO on the executive board as digital communications and sergeant at arms. Gene is also secretary of the North Texas UAW area retiree council and serves as state secretary of the Texas Alliance to Retired Americans. He will argue that progressive forces must engage in economic struggle as well as political struggle if we hope to win. Gene will show the world that the world economic solution has become sadly predictable, but the progressive forces are strong. He concludes that when we garner focus, it's clear that we will be successful, we'll be unstoppable. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Gene Lantz.
I'm not sure if everybody can see this graph. This is a graph of inequality. It shows, this is for the United States, and it shows how much of the wealth that's created goes to the top 10%.
Can I pass that around?
Yeah, I guess you could pass it
When
around.
does it begin and when does it end? When's the beginning?
But I'm going to refer to it several times.
Okay, I just want,
Well, let me just hold it up, okay? It starts over here in 1910, and it goes to 2010. Inequality was relatively high over here. Inequality is very high later. And there was this period when it wasn't that bad, when inequality came down. And here in America, that was basically between 1935 and 1980. Let me just put it up here, because I'm going to refer to it some more. I got this from Mr. Piketty, Thomas Piketty. Now this is not his main book. Thomas Piketty's main book is called Capital in the 21st Century. It's a world-shaking book. It's a bestseller. And the reason it got so important is because he had data, much further, much longer data from many more years back than people have got, than most economists have. His data goes back into the 18th century and forward, of course, all the way to today. So it's pretty hard to argue with him about what happened because he has the data. And so this is, yes?
What's the name of that book you're holding up?
Why Save the Bankers. This is just a collection of Piketty's news articles. And frankly, it's more interesting simply because he wrote it. If he hadn't written Capital in the 21st Century, nobody would care about this book. Capital in the 21st Century is the big book. It's the, you can get it at the Dallas Library, by the way. And it's changing what everybody thinks. I'm going to use this to show, I'm going to tell you, first of all, one thing that Tom didn't mention about my credentials is that I also do a talk show on Saturday mornings. Some of you may have heard it, some of you have been on it. It's called The Workers' Beat. It's the only pro-workers radio program anywhere around here for hundreds of miles. So,
Is it 9 a.m.?
yes, it is at 9 a.m. on KNON 89.3, or it's better to listen on your computer. It's knon.org. Now, this long data is not quite the same for Europe and for the whole world. For Europe and the whole world, inequality was much worse in 1910, and then it falls off starting in 1914. But both of these graphs, in fact, all of the graphs that Piketty makes, show this big dip in inequality in the middle of the 20th century. And the interpretation of that information is what I'm going to disagree with. This is the book that labor looks at mostly. It's called Runaway Inequality. It's by Les Leopold. It's very good, and it's also full of graphs. And a lot of those graphs show the same dip in the middle, not in the middle, no, I'm sorry. They do show inequality, but their graphs, his graphs start in 1970 and shows things getting worse after that. Mr. Leopold and most of the economists on our side, the ones that are on working families' side, and all of the labor people use this. And in this book, it only starts there. It starts around 1970 and then shows how inequality has gotten really bad since then. And then it recommends that we try to get back to this, which they consider normal. Back in the old days, in the 50s and 60s, when inequality was not as bad as it was later. So the way to get back, they say, is to elect good guys. Because what happened, it caused all this inequality according to the labor movement, and most of the people on our side, the bad thing that happened in 1980. And you know what it was and who it was. It wasn't just President Reagan, it was Reaganomics and trickle-down economics and supply-side economics and theories that led to inequality getting much, much worse. But if you're only looking from here up, you're making a mistake. Now, we started to realize how bad inequality was when the Occupy movement was going on, didn't we? Because the Occupy movement, we ran around with the Occupy movement, and I'm sure some of you were there. I was. We yelled, "We are the 99%." And the 1% is getting all of everything, and we're not, you know. So the Occupy movement made it very, very clear to us that inequality was getting much worse. And for that, we should be very grateful. But as far as like what we're going to do about it, they didn't really have much of a solution. I mean, just going to live in tents wasn't exactly a solution that was going to, you know, really make a difference. So we owe them for having called our attention to inequality. Then came Bernie Sanders, which shook the world. It's still shaking the world. Now Bernie Sanders also is looking at this same period from Reagan on, more or less. And he explained not only that inequality is getting worse, but he told us how it's happening. You know, things like tax cuts, things like taking people's pensions, things like union busting. He showed us the nuts and bolts of inequality and how inequality was happening. And he recommended new nuts and bolts that would be better programs, you know, that would help. And for that, we should be grateful. I'm going to tell you that both of them were wrong.
Amen.
All of them were wrong because they were only looking at this part of the graph. They didn't have Piketty. This was before Piketty. Piketty's book was published in 2015. And he showed that this little period here, when inequality was low, was not normal. He showed that prior to that time, ever since the beginning of capitalism up to now, inequality got worse. And since 1973, or since this period here, inequality has gotten worse. And that's normal. What's not normal is when inequality went down. Just this little 40 or 50 year period in here, that was what was not normal. That's why I'm telling you, things are worse than you think. We're not going to just start electing good people and get back to these good old days. If we had, perhaps the election of President Obama would have solved all of our problems. In fact, some people thought it would solve all of our problems, didn't they? Obama got elected with Democratic majorities in both houses, and yet inequality continued. Inequality is still going up. It's going through the ceiling, and Mr. Piketty assures us that it's not going to change. Now, a lot of economists, not on our side, some economists tell us that capitalism has a natural balance to it, and everything's going to come back, you know, or maybe it's like a pendulum or something, you know, or a circle, and things will come back around. That's bull. That's baloney. What is going to happen is that inequality is going to get intolerable. That's what Mr. Piketty says, and I think that's what serious economists since 2015 are saying, that rising inequality is the natural state of this kind of the economics that we live under. It's going to get worse. it's going to continue to get worse until it gets intolerable. That's the bad news. Now, as to why did we have this oddball period when inequality went down? Well, Mr. Piketty says that it was due to certain shocks to the system, and governments adjusted to those shocks in progressive ways.
What was it?
One of the shocks was
What was those years again?
this is 1910 and this is 2010.
The years that it dipped
The big dip here in America was 1935,
to 1980. Okay.
from 1935 to 1980 in America. And in Europe and everybody else, it kind of goes like that. But it still shows big inequality going down during the middle of the century.
Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. I was talking about why. Mr. Piketty says that there were shocks. And these shocks included a major depression and a world war, and then another world war. And governments made adjustments to those world wars, particularly by raising taxes. You know, when World War I started, taxes on businesses in America were low. And when Mr. Roosevelt got elected during the Depression, he raised them, doubled them, more or less. And they kept going up, so that when I was a child, the top level of the progressive income tax was 90%. When I was a child. Was it 94? Okay. So they raised taxes, and they raised the luxury tax. They raised what's the tax on stocks? Capital gains tax. That was 55%, as I recall, when I was in high school and college. So they made those adjustments, and because of these shocks, according to Mr. Piketty. That's wrong. There's only one thing that can curtail the natural development of capitalism. Only one thing.
Socialism.
And that is,
Shut up.
it would be good if you'd be quiet, you know? The one thing that can stop the bosses from taking your wages and everything is unionism, getting organized. It's working people. So what really happened in this period from 1914 to 1980 or so was that the workers' movement was very, very strong. If you know your history, you know that the Socialist Party was very powerful in the early part of the 20th century. They were getting millions of votes. They had people in Congress. They had people being elected. They had mayors and dog catchers and people being elected all over the country, the Socialist Party. And in 1905, 1901, they started the Industrial Workers of the World, which was a very militant union kind of thing. They weren't really exactly a union, they were really revolutionaries. But they were scaring the bosses half to death. And they were winning some really big strikes. They were winning a lot of little strikes, little farmer strikes and lumberjack strikes and things like that. But they won some really big ones too. Patterson Silk Strike, Patterson, New Jersey, I think it was. And in New York, the textile workers, women, young women especially, were winning some big strikes with the Industrial Workers of the World. So there was a very powerful workers' movement starting back here. In 1935, the Committee for Industrial Organization got started. And the Committee for Industrial Organization took a different attitude toward organizing. They said, we're going to organize everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, we're going to organize you. It doesn't matter if you're black, we're going to organize you. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer or if you're sweeping the floor, we're going to organize everybody. And that was different. It was a very, very powerful idea, very strong idea. And it turned out that they organized millions and millions and millions of people. So between 1935 and 1947, I'm sorry, the percentage of workers that was organized went from around 10% up to 33%. A third of the workforce was organized in that period around 1947. So, and that was also true at the national level, at the international level. When was the Russian Revolution? 1917. Back here. And during the Great Depression, the socialists were saying that, look, there's only one major country in the world that's not having a depression, and it's the Soviet Union. So they got very, very popular. They were very, very strong and very popular during that period. And I'm sorry, this distracts me when you do that, and I lose track of what I was trying to say. So they were very popular. Then came World War II. And in World War II, there was a resistance movement. You've seen a million movies. I saw one today about the Maquis in France, right? The underground that fought the Germans. And this was worldwide. There was occupying armies from Germany and Japan were holding a lot of territory, and there were people fighting back. And the people who fought back, they were mostly socialists. They were working people. They were for the working people as against the fascists. And at the end of the war, they were extremely popular. There was a guy named Enver Hoxha in Albania. He got to be the head of state for, decades afterwards. Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia. He led the resistance. He was a socialist. And then he led the country. And Yugoslavia was a big country at that time. Look at Ho Chi Minh, led the resistance to Japan during World War II. He was a socialist. They were very, very, very popular. The main one was Mao Zedong, who led the resistance against Japanese occupation. So during this period, the workers' movement was very strong. And that's the only reason that you had a dip in inequality. And that's what's leading me to the point that I wanted to make, which is that you have to have a strong workers' movement to solve the problem of inequality. If you look at the whole graph, don't look at the part that suits you, just from Reagan on. But look at the whole graph. You realize that, and Piketty will tell you, if you read him, that this going into inequality is natural. It's what we have. Now, the labor movement began to die out in the 1970s. Talking about America, but this was true worldwide too. Mao Zedong was largely discredited in the 1970s. Ho Chi Minh, I guess, was dead, but the world workers' movement was curtailed. The communists, who had been very, very popular in the United States, were just literally driven out of business. And a few of us here are old enough to remember when all the movies were made against them and all the TV programs were made against them, and all of them were arrested or deported, or in the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, they were executed. So some people, there's one book, I can't remember the name of it, I think it's called The Death of Labor. Says that labor died in 1972 during the Democratic Party convention because the labor failed to support George McGovern for president. They just didn't take a stand But it was really because they were for Nixon. And according to this one book, that was the death of the labor movement. I think the labor movement died is dying of a more slow death than that. I think they began to die in the 60s because they didn't support the women's movement, for the most part. For the most part, they didn't support the civil rights movement. I know some of them did. Walter Reuther did. But most of them didn't. And I think it was the Vietnam War that really hurt them the most. And that culminated pretty much in 1972. The AFL-CIO was the last major organization in the United States that still supported the war in Vietnam, even after all the politicians and everybody else had given up on it. So I think the war in Vietnam hurt them very much, hurt their credibility. I think that young people did not believe in them. And so they lost. They had a third of the membership. They had a third of the workforce organized. Now they have 11%. They haven't really lost that much in the last few years. But between 1947, well, really 1950, some odd, and 1980, they lost a lot of members. It wasn't because people left, it's just because they didn't organize new people. And the jobs were going overseas, and automation was getting all the jobs. So labor's strength was largely gone when Mr. Reagan took office. And he turned viciously against labor and succeeded in the things that he did. The upshot of this decline in the labor movement was rising inequality. And up goes the graphic again. So my argument is this: the solution is not elect good guys. Although certainly we have to work hard to win every possible election. And I certainly don't want to distract from the elections that are going on right now. We have to work really hard to try to win those elections. But we also have to organize. I was glad Michelle came tonight because Michelle's an organizer. She's signing them up. And we have to have petitioning campaigns. We have to have boycotts. You know, we've almost lost the power of boycotts since the farm workers, the last really good one was the lettuce boycott. When was that? 73 or something like that? 74? We have to have the economic struggle. We have to do what the industrial workers of the world did. They, unfortunately for them, they did not believe in electoral politics at all. And that's one of the reasons that they failed. So I'm not saying that we should turn our backs on electoral politics. I'm just saying we have to do a whole lot more. And we have to recognize that it's not some abstraction. It's the workers' movement that has to win. So I implore you to do this individually, to get involved with the workers' movement. I implore you to, for example, if you're interested in retirement, get involved in the Alliance for Retired Americans. That's my organization. And we meet next Wednesday at 12:30 at 334 Bishop Street. And everybody's welcome if you want to fight for retiree rights, pensions, and Social Security and that sort of thing. Please come. Tom comes. He's the vice president. And if you will let me have your email, I'll make sure that you know everything that the labor movement is doing, because I'm the guy who sends that stuff out every week. I do the newsletter for the Dallas AFL-CIO. So please do that. Now, just on the good news side, the AFL-CIO had a turnaround in 1995, and things began to get really much, much better. Prior to that time, they were quite isolated, and they were getting smaller, and they were losing their credibility, especially with young people. Now they're reaching out to young people. They've got a chapter here called Young Active Labor Leaders that meets first Mondays, I think it is, 7 o'clock. They reach out to gays. They reach out to immigrants. They reach out to women. They're very diverse. And they didn't used to be. They used to be very isolated. Now they're very diverse. And they're getting bigger. The Dallas AFL-CIO has grown pretty well. At one time, I can remember when it only had one person in the whole Dallas AFL-CIO. Now there's 7. 7 makes the staff. And the meetings are bigger and they're more diverse. And we've signed up a lot more of the working people of Dallas County. The best news of all, I like to end on an upbeat, the best news of all is the teachers.
Yeah.
Because you remember teachers used to be like mouses, you know, and they would tell us, I used to be a teacher, they would tell us, well, you're professionals, you know, you wouldn't go on strike, well, that's beneath you, you know. And now the teachers are really kicking butt around the country, starting with the West Virginia teachers during this past year.
Oklahoma?
They carried out a political strike, a statewide strike, not just for their own wages, but for school supplies and for bus drivers and cafeteria workers and everybody that's connected to providing good education. And 4 other states followed West Virginia, one of them being Oklahoma, and one of them was Arizona. It was states that you wouldn't think they would step up at all. And right now, even though they're not saying much about it on the news, a lot of the teachers in Washington State are on strike. What happened was that they won a lawsuit or something, and the legislature had to turn loose of another $1 billion. And then the school district said, well, yeah, we got the $1 billion, but we're not going to give it to you. And so the teachers just picked up their picket signs and went out. Some of them have already won good contracts. I heard today that Seattle had won a good contract. And so some of them have already won good contracts. Some of them are on strike now. Some of them are planning to go on strike as soon as school starts in their areas. So the good news is that what I'm recommending is already happening. We are right now in the middle of the biggest upsurge in American history. This is a lot bigger than the Occupy movement. This is a lot bigger than the Vietnam War movement. Some of us were in that. And we thought that was the biggest thing that had ever happened. This is bigger than the women's movement was, bigger than the civil rights movement was, because it embraces a wider variety of people, more people. It's women more than anybody else that are leading it. But it is nevertheless the biggest upsurge, progressive upsurge in American history. It's not all that well organized. And it's not focused on the workers' movement the way I'm recommending. But we're getting there. It's coming that way. So I don't think that rising inequality is going to result in something terrible. I think that people are going to fight it, people are going to get organized, and we are going to win. And that's my message. Thank you. Now it's questions and answers.
Right, you get the answer. They get
I don't have any answers.
Who wants to be first?
Yes. Gene, as a part of the teachers who decided to take matters in their own hand, striking, didn't that include teachers in Oklahoma too? That's what they did?
After West Virginia, yeah. West Virginia showed us how to do it. And an interesting thing about that too is, I would get some arguments about this, but I will maintain that that strike was not started by the teachers union. They took credit for it later. That strike was started by a handful of teachers on a Facebook page.
Wow.
And the teachers unions jumped in and took credit on all of these states, but the truth is that the laws are prohibitive for them. They pretty much can't call a strike. It's illegal for most of them. It is here in Texas.
Could you say something about the so-called right-to-work laws and when was their advent and what they really do instead of giving people the right to work, what they're really about?
That might be good to say for you to deliver, you know. When we're at the next part, you get the microphone, right? Go ahead.
And what are your thoughts on the president refusing to give this 2.7% raise to federal workers? What's that all about?
Okay.
Blaming them for the deficit.
All right, should I answer that, Tom? Sure. Okay, first of all, right to work. The right to work is a Texas phenomenon. It passed in Texas before it was legal. In 1947, they passed a law called the Taft-Hartley Law that said that states could declare themselves union-free and say that nobody had to join the union. In other words, you could scab if you wanted to. And Texas, even before the Taft-Hartley Law was passed, Texas had already done it. The actual confusion about it is because instead of calling this the right to scab law, which is what it is, they call it the right to work law. And that particular public relations coup was created in Dallas by an editor of the Dallas Morning News. He made that little phrase up, and it's been confusing people the world around ever since. Then on the federal workers, I don't know, there's mixed news about the federal workers. And you mentioned that President Trump just the other day announced that he was I think in the budgets, he's going to try to make sure that the federal workers don't get a raise. He's mad at them, and he probably should be. He passed a series of executive orders a few weeks back that were meant to break those unions. One of them was that they had to be kicked out of their offices. You know, like take Veterans Administration, like the VA hospital here. The union has an office in that hospital, and the people that work in that hospital can go to the union office to make complaints, you know, or to do their paperwork or something like that. So he passed an executive order that they all have to be kicked out of their offices. He also passed an executive order that said that the people who represent those workers cannot take the time to go talk to them. So if you're working, say you're a nurse at Veterans Hospital, and the boss has done something that's unsafe or something, and you call out your steward, you want to talk to your steward, the steward's not going to be allowed to come. He'd have to see you at home after work or something like that, which is basically not going to happen. So he passed several executive orders that were meant to destroy the unions for federal employees. That's the bad news. The good news is that a judge said it was unconstitutional. So those executive orders right now are not in effect. Of course, Mr. Trump will take it to the Supreme Court where all of his tame judges will be. So I fear for what's going to happen when it gets to the Supreme Court. And as for the 2.7% wage increase, as it stands right now, they're not going to get it, right? That's the way it stands right now. I don't know how that's going to come out. I'm sure they will fight it. The question is not what are they going to do. The question is what are you going to do? Because we held a rally downtown for the federal workers, and I helped organize that. I didn't go, but I helped organize it. And you know, you could come. The federal workers are just now learning that they have to fight, because they've had a pretty good deal for a long time. But now they're starting to wake up. This guy called me and said, I'm the president of this Federal Workers Union. And he said, I've been the president for, I don't know, it's 20 or 30 years, you know. He said, I don't know how to make a rally. He never had one. So I had to tell him, well, call the police and tell them where you're going to be and pick a place and pick a time, and let me know and I'll start getting to work. So he didn't know. They never had one. That's good news, isn't it? Because people are learning how to act.
Gee, I'm a retired federal worker. I work for the U.S. District Courts here. What I'm concerned about is 2.7 cost of living. It's just a cost of living increase.
I see.
And it usually, when there's a cost of living increase, it is also goes to the retirees. And I think
Really?
this is also going to affect me directly
Yeah.
if it goes through.
Well, I'm hoping he doesn't get away with it. I'm hoping either a judge will stop him or that the federal employees will organize enough protest that some of the politicians will listen. But what's the result of cutting those federal workers and cutting those retirees? What's the result going to be? More inequality. It's just going to keep going up.
That's the goal.
And what's going to be the result of this giant tax giveaway that they did last December, where they cut the taxes for the very, very wealthy? They cut other people's taxes a little bit, but for the very, very wealthy, they got most of that. It was like $1 trillion. What's going to be the result of that? More inequality. And these are numbers that Piketty didn't even have in 2015 when he published his book. He didn't even realize how much these tax cuts were going to go through and how much pressure was going to be put on working people to keep their wages and their benefits and their pensions down. It's worse than he thought. So that's part of my message tonight is things are worse than you think. Who's got the microphone? Okay, go Charlotte. That's Charlotte right there who, when she came in, I pointed her out and I said, pound for pound, that's the best activist in Dallas.
Well, I've been a little slow since I had my granddaughter, but I know that it seems highly unlikely right now, but it seems to me that there are some laws that we could put in place that would limit the extreme amount of wealth that some people collect. And I know whenever I mention this, people usually say that's un-American to limit people's income. But I think when it gets into the really big numbers, it seems to me we could limit it at least in relation to the people that work there.
Mr. Piketty's solution is a worldwide tax on wealth. Not an income tax, not on income, just on wealth. If you have a lot of money, the more you have, the more he would tax you. And he wants to do this not just in any one country, because see, the countries are all competing with each other.
Right.
That's why, was it Luxembourg? Luxembourg had a tax haven going. So all these companies were putting their factories and stuff in Luxembourg because there were very, very low taxes there. And it was, and they were hurting all the countries around there because they were all going to Luxembourg. So the companies, the different countries are competing as to their taxes. That's one of the arguments that the Republicans gave last year for their big tax cut. They said, we've got to lower our taxes because the other countries have lower corporate taxes than we do. So they said that we have to lower our taxes in order to beat these other countries. And of course they're saying that over there. They said, well, look, the Americans just lowered their taxes, so we can lower ours even more. So what's going to result? More inequality. Who's got the microphone? Okay, yes, sir.
I've got a question, please. Where the graph dips, what year is that? Where the graph dips down, what year is it?
Well, this is just America.
Yeah.
Basically from 1935 to 1980.
Well, that doesn't include World War I. You mentioned World War I.
Yeah, that's because Piketty, as I said, Piketty has data for 3 centuries. And in Europe and the world in general, it starts up here and then drops, starting with World War I, for the world as a whole.
Yeah, but that's because of a lot of other reasons. In Europe, for instance.
Well, what he said was that it was a shock.
Yeah.
That it was a shock to the system, and that in order to finance the war in Europe, basically is what he was talking about, they raised taxes on the rich. And so that's why inequality in Europe began to fall at that time. The World War I didn't hit the United States that hard. We were only in it for 2 years. And it was, what, 5 years long?
The recession had a lot to do with this.
Yeah. The recession is the shock that Piketty says caused them to raise taxes and lower inequality in the United States. In other words, it was Roosevelt. But this all lends to the argument that we should elect good guys and not elect bad guys. And we say, you know, Piketty or Mr. Sanders too would say that Roosevelt was a good guy, see? And he replaced Hoover, who was a bad guy. And so if we elect good guys, you know, we'll lower inequality. But I'm saying that it wasn't good guys and bad guys. That's oversimplified. And I'm for good guys, I'm not for bad guys. But it's oversimplified to say that that's what we must do. So it's not just a matter of elections. It's a matter of power.
So the reason that you are stating, because of this inequality that started in the 70s, is it, I think?
No, in the United States,
Yeah.
the inequality fell 1935 to 1980.
1980, excuse me.
And then in 1980 it started going up again.
And the reason is Reagan economics.
No, that's what most people believe. That's what this book says. That's what this book says. And I'm saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's because the labor movement was weak.
So what you're saying is that if the unions were stronger, then we wouldn't have this. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. But it isn't just unions. The workers' movement is more than just unions. You know, it's everybody that works. Working families.
But without unions, apart from having the ability to vote, without unions and without having the ability to vote, how can working people affect things?
Well, okay. Are we just going to go back and forth, just you and me? Because she's waving her hands back there. She wants to ask a question too. But unions can affect inequality just the way those teachers in Washington are doing it right now. The ones that have settled have gotten raises of 15%. 15% raises, that's almost unheard of. And we're talking about trying to get 2.7% for federal workers. And, there was another one recently. Oh, Walt Disney. Disney World. 38,000 workers at Disney have won big increases. They got $1,000 bonus. They got a $15 minimum wage. And I don't remember the percentage, but they got some raises. So going on strike is one way to raise wages and reduce inequality.
Gene, wouldn't it just be simpler if we had a national, a federal, big minimum wage increase, $15 or $20 an hour, just one move?
The labor movement in general is for a $15 minimum wage. And in some little places they've won that. They want it in Seattle. First they got it for airport workers at someplace called SeaTac, where the little town around the airport out there in Seattle. And then the whole city of Seattle adopted it. And there have been several other cities, mostly out west.
But that's just, a little bit here, a little bit there. I mean, we have to elect all good guys, all Democrats, on the national level to get a federal $15 an hour minimum wage.
Most of the Democrats are not for $15 an hour wage. Mrs. Clinton wasn't.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Clinton was for $12. You remember that was in the debate? That's right. She said $12 is good enough. Did you want the microphone?
I'm shattered. I'm shattered.
But, I agree with you. I agree with you. A big increase in the minimum wage would go a long way toward curtailing inequality. It's just a lot easier to say than it is to do.
We just have to.
You can't do that without power, without strength, without unity, without bringing people together and organizing. That's what we need.
What about the, I don't remember the date, but Citizens United, I'm thinking of that big survey, that big study that was just released, and it was actually by the Bush, three organizations, the Bush Center, and then there's the Biden, oh gosh, it's another one, Joe Biden, and then the third one, I want to say Freedom Fund. Anyway, it's a study where 80% of Americans, this goes across the party, believe that there's just no more democracy, and the biggest culprit, racism was one, but the bigger culprit was is money. That the good guys are bought out. That the same people who are that are funding the bad guys are funding the good guys, and there's just seems to be nothing anybody can do or will do about it. And a lot of people say Citizens United. A lot of people say, that's just the way it is. We have to accept.
Does everybody know what she means by Citizens United? It was a Supreme Court decision that corporations have a legal right to spend as much money on elections as they would like to, because they are people, and they're just as good as anybody else and a whole lot richer. So they can do what they want to in the election. If you think of democracy not as an either or, because there's really not very many either or things in the world. There's more democracy and there's less democracy, and there's kind of in between democracy. How many in this room think we are more democratic today than we were 10 years ago? Anybody? Well, we're not. We're becoming less democratic. And that's crazy. If you're as old as I am, you think democracy always gets better. Like civil rights movement, poll taxes. I'm old enough to remember poll taxes. They used to make you pay to vote in Texas. And they had these requirements that almost no African Americans in the whole South could vote at all. They had some way to keep them from doing it. Here in Texas, they had what they call the white primary. And they said, well, you can vote, but you can't vote in the Democratic primary. And the Democratic primary was all where everybody got elected back in those days, because they were all Dixiecrats. And it took a fight to win those things, but anyway, we got more democracy. In my whole lifetime, I expected more democracy all the time. I guess it was when I was in graduate school, they started printing ballots in Spanish in Texas. And they never had done that before. And I think you can even get ballots in Vietnamese in some places. I don't really know. But, democracy was getting better right up until Reagan. And since then, it's been going the other way. And the Supreme Court rulings have really hurt us on democracy. The big fight going on just on voting is really trying to stop minorities from voting. They've always tried to stop minorities from voting ever since the Civil War, but there's they've all used all kinds of different ways, and they're using all kinds of different ways now. But essentially, they're trying to keep minorities from voting. and they're trying to keep cities from determining their own fate. You know, the legislature is trying to keep the cities from, for example, stopping fracking. Like up there in Denton, they passed a rule that you can't frack in town. And the state legislature says, oh, well, y'all can't say that.
That's right.
Us and our oil company friends say that they can frack wherever they want.
That's right.
This is not exactly, I didn't know talking about equality, but it's about labor, and we heard it said in this, heard some people say in the street, the immigrants are taking our jobs. Of course, that is a myth, and it's been, you know, it's been the talk on public radio for quite some time about how they're reviving small towns where young people would get education and move away and the town would wither, but when the immigrants came in, they revived them. And I was wondering if you knew anything about the period of time when they started bringing Mexican people over to do work that they didn't have anybody to do.
You know, I'm an Okie. You know, I was an Okie.
Yeah.
I was born in Ada, Oklahoma.
Hey?
Now, they started the Bracero program. The government brought people from Mexico to replace the Okies and do the harvests down in the valley and in California. I guess it was 30s, 40s. Yeah.
Or they just didn't, was it because they didn't have enough people, or because?
They didn't have enough people for the price they wanted to pay, the wages they wanted to pay.
It was seasonal.
You know, there's this, you read now, if you read the papers now, you say there's a job shortage. We got a job shortage over in so-and-so, you know.
They have a worker
Terrible
shortage.
labor shortage, you know, terrible labor shortage. There's no labor shortage. If there was a labor shortage, wages would be going up, wouldn't they? Just like any other commodity. If there was a piano shortage, pianos would be going up. If there was a pizza shortage, pizzas would be going up. So, but right now they're saying labor shortage. What they really mean is they can't get people to work for the crummy wages that they're offering. Okay, who else has got a question? Yes, ma'am.
I think one way to get equality for people is to do away with the electoral college. So that one vote, you know, you place a vote and it's legit, you don't have a super delegate or someone in the electoral college overriding your vote. So don't you think that we should push to eliminate electoral college and make it get more equal?
I'm for any kind of democratic move. I mean, we've been talking economics, we've been talking dollars and cents all night. We could have done the exact same thing talking about democracy. We could have said democracy was getting worse and worse here and started getting better in here, and then it started getting worse again. And that's a direct product of the system that we live in, and that the only way to get more democracy back is to empower working families. It would have been the same argument. I was just talking economics instead of politics, but it's the same thing. It's a matter of having the power to do anything, and we are getting the power usurped, taken away from us, so that the inequality is just getting worse and worse. And to the point that Mr. Piketty says it will become intolerable. He doesn't say what's going to happen after that. I guess slavery. You know, they had slavery in the South for 300 or 400 years. I guess they figured they can go back to slavery and still get things done. I don't know. But I consider that intolerable. So levels are going to get intolerable. Yes, sister?
When you speak of intolerable and the mechanics of slavery, can you think of any parallel with that and things that we have experienced historically, where do you by degree say intolerable? What would you anticipate that to be? What would you see happening in the world outside, that breaking point? This is intolerable. Serfdom, bona fide delaying, slavery, indentured labor.
There's really only one, there's only really one really big case in the 20th century in which slavery was reintroduced.
Human trafficking.
Hitler's Germany.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They reintroduced slavery as a way to get work done. And so they reacted a certain way to the crisis that was going on. So the main thing, since we've been talking about democracy, I think that what's the natural, if we just left things the way they're going, if we just said, okay, well, it's not really my problem. You know, like in that poem, you know, they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew. They came for the homosexuals, but I wasn't a homosexual. And then, of course, when they came after me, there was nobody to ask to help. So, here's what I think is going to happen. If we just left it alone and didn't do anything, we'd get fascism. I think more and more people are seeing that. I think that's kind of what you were saying with that study. They're saying, people are saying democracy is already over.
Well, and I'm just going to say it, and y'all can just, somebody here can just throw something at me, but are we not coming, look in Europe, I mean, look at the people who are being, I mean, are we not already moving in that direction?
Yes.
And many people will already use the F word, and I'll say,
Yes.
well, we got it here, we got
Yes.
it.
Yes. I will say that, but I will also say that they're not going to make it. Because we are not going to sit around on our hands and just let things happen. Let me encapsulate everything I said. If we leave things the way they are, inequality is going to get worse. That's the bad news. The good news is that we're not going to leave things the way they are. We are coming together. We're getting more diverse. We're getting better organized. We're in the biggest upsurge we've ever seen in American history. And we are going to do something about it. But what I implore you to do as individuals is to focus on the workers' movement and get as involved in it as you can. That's what I told Michelle the first time I met her. And now she's a union organizer. Yay, Michelle!
I came here 2 years ago wanting to get more involved in labor. And Jean kind of helped send me in a direction, and here I am. It's awesome.
She's not just a union organizer, she's also kind of an expert on labor history. Somebody that people go to find out about some aspects of Texas labor history. Go ahead.
Yeah, two quick questions. What do you think all of this tariff wars that our president is trying to implement is going to have on our pocketbooks and workers and everything? Secondly, what would the hourly wage be today if it adjusted for inflation? If it were, what number? If it adjusted for inflation?
Do you have a number? The number I have is 18 something.
Is that right?
18 something. But you may have another number, I don't know. I haven't actually done the math myself, I just saw it somewhere.
Okay.
And
It's been a
before
couple
that,
years.
you brought up the tariffs.
Yeah, tariffs.
Now this is we could do a whole different session on this. But since you asked, since you gave me a chance to talk about it, I wanted to disagree with the labor movement. The AFL-CIO supports the tariffs. They do.
They do.
And it's probably because of the steel workers. The steel workers have been wanting tariffs on steel for a long time. And now they're getting them. So the AFL-CIO says the tariffs are a good thing. And they're also looking forward to hoping that the NAFTA thing turns out to be a good thing. So they're not just, anti-Trump. They are for working people. And in their opinion, the tariffs are in favor, are a good thing for American working people. I disagree. And I've put this on my blog. If you're ever curious about what I actually think, it's genelance.org. There's a blog. And I said in the tariff that the reason that they're making this mistake is because they're just looking at the American workers. I'm telling them that they cannot solve problems just looking at American workers. Because working people worldwide are going to have to come up with solutions. It's not going to just happen in one country because, see, the countries all compete with each other. So let's say you got tariffs here and the steel workers were happy and our wages went up. Well, that means that the more companies would move to other countries because they'd be competing, you know, and they'd go somewhere else where they didn't have to pay so much. So if we really want to solve problems, we have to be international in our diagnosis and in our prognosis. And they're not being international when they say that Mr. Trump's tariffs are a good thing. Now the CIO, I love the CIO. Originally it was the Committee for Industrial Organizing, then they changed it to after the AFL kicked them out, they became known as the Congress for Industrial Organizations. And they were internationalists. They were very, very powerful. And they had really good ideology. Unfortunately, they gave it up in 1947. But prior to that time, they were quite the internationalists. The good news is that there's a lot more of this international stuff going on today. Was anybody here for the picket against Exxon? Were you there, Michelle? Charlotte, you were there. The picket against Exxon when the Exxon had their shareholders meeting?
I don't think I was there.
Down at the place where they have the opera and stuff. Well, we picketed them. Mostly it was the environmentalists, but labor came too. Well, there was a bunch of guys down there from Australia. And Exxon had gotten them fired from their jobs. And so we were just tickled to death to have them. And they were working with us and we were working with them. And I made a video of their little presentation. And I got 7 shares and over 700 views on that video. So we were kind of internationalists right downtown Dallas there for that one day. And so unions, more and more, they are getting more internationalist. My own union, the UAW, opposed apartheid in South Africa. And when Nelson Mandela got elected president, he came to visit the people that had helped him. And first he went to Cuba, but then he came to the United States and went to our convention because he said the UAW had helped the Auto Workers Union in America had helped defeat apartheid in South Africa. I don't think that we're generally internationalists, but in some ways we are. It's happening. It's coming. You know, we're not anti-racists either. We're not environmentalists either. We're not for the women's movement 100% either. But it's going that way. We're getting better. That's really good news. Yes, sir.
And the whole illegal immigration thing of companies exploiting cheap labor from those here, is that a real issue?
Yeah.
It's a housing
gigantic issue. Up till 1999, the American labor movement, well, I should go back further. Back around 1900 or so, the AFL was very anti-racist, very good on race issues. Unfortunately, remember the Chinese Exclusion Act? It was in the early part of the 20th century. The Chinese were coming over here to work on the railroads. And so the AFL was opposed to the Chinese coming over here to get jobs. And so they kind of gave in, and before long they were pretty racist. A lot of unions wouldn't let black members join. They would start separate locals. They'd say, well, y'all can join, but you have to be in your own local. You have to have segregated locals. And that went on until in 1935. The CIO said, no, we're not gonna do it that way. We're gonna organize everybody into one union. And so we became less racist. So up until 1999 though, the AFL position on undocumented workers was to deport them. They're stealing our jobs, so let's just get rid of them. And so they tried to work with the government to deport all undocumented workers. In 1999, they changed their position and said, this ain't working. Never did work. The government doesn't work with us. The government works with the employers. And the employers want these undocumented workers, and we're not getting anywhere. So what they decided in 1999 was, let's organize everybody. Let's learn Spanish and start organizing everybody, which was a much, much stronger approach. That's one of the great things that happened when we got this new leadership in the AFL-CIO. I went by yesterday morning. I went by the AFL-CIO because I was going in to do the newsletter. And down there on the first floor, there was a meeting going on. It was about half whites and half Latin Americans. And they were studying a new program to help Spanish language people to become citizens. And the president, the main officer of the AFL-CIO was in that committee. And so was the political director. So that's the two top leaders of the labor movement in Dallas County. We're down there working on an immigrants problem. So this is a big plus, a big improvement. It's one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic, because they are changing. That doesn't mean everybody in the labor movement is anti-racist. It doesn't mean everybody in the labor movement is learning Spanish. And it doesn't mean everybody in the labor movement supports anything to do with undocumented workers. Because there's a lot of prejudice in this land. And it's in the labor movement too. But it's changing. It's getting better. So undocumented workers are now, we're trying to organize them. And Michelle probably signs them up herself.
No, they don't work for the state.
Yeah, that's right. They can't get jobs for the state. And she works for state employees. Okay, anybody else? Now it's your turn to get up here and tear me apart. But don't forget, I get the last word.
Yes, I did.
Now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? You want to be first? I did this while you were talking. Yes, you do.
I want to thank Gene. I know I probably button-held him and got him to comment on a lot of the things that I wanted to say. He answered some of his questions. I really think the one thing that scares Republicans the most, and they're the architect of this latest tax law that is backloaded to after this 2018 election, when the worst of its aspects are going to kick in. You just wait for a lot of people who voted for this president and administration when they do the taxes next year, things like that. And certain aspects of it was obviously targeted toward Democrat states, not being able to deduct state income tax. We don't have that here, but California and a few other places is going to devastate many of them. I think Republicans are scared to death that poor and working class, white Americans, black Americans, and Hispanic Americans are going to get together and realize that we have a common interest, economic interest, and we're going to form coalitions and begin to vote our interests. I think that scares especially Republicans, and then a lot of corporatist Democrats too, who are bought out, because corporations now own our politicians. And they pass laws, buy them off, that's gonna benefit many of them. And I think one of the aspects that I got out of what he was saying is, begin to form coalitions across racial and ethnic lines just based on economics, what's in our best interest, and then wield that as a political force and power. I don't have the organizational skills or background to do that. But the thing that baffles me about is I think about Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan states that President Trump won in this last election. The people who voted for President Obama voted for President Trump now, and I'm thinking many of them are beginning to feel the negative impact of that. So I didn't ask our speaker what he thought about those in that area, but I didn't see too much. I didn't see anything here that I would disagree with. It's very inspirational, and I'm hoping that Americans across ethnic lines will begin to form coalitions and vote their economic interests, something that Republicans have been able to do. Many in southern states are doing, voting against their own economic best interests. And then the deficit is so high now, you can't give federal workers a raise. I'm thinking Republicans are playing the long game. If Democrats take over in 2020, the deficit probably will be higher, and Republicans who know how to play hardball is going to hang it around the Democrats' neck. They're not going to let Democrats in both houses, in the Senate and the Oval Office, raise taxes and change it. They're trying to force them to go in and hit and cut social safety nets. They're trying to force them to be able to go in and make deep cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and some of the other social safety net programs, which some has called shooting Santa Claus. I think that's what Republicans are really trying to do. Yeah, that's what Republicans call it. And they're trying to force Democrats to do what they don't want to do. And they have front-loaded everything now by giving the super rich these big tax cuts. They even close loopholes on corporations and wealthy people who stash their profits overseas but take their losses here. So now's the time to exercise that at the voting booth and the voting polls, and that's what I'm doing this fall. And the big challenge for progressives is that, our base is energized, but their base is energized as well. And I'm watching this Florida election for the governor's race as a classic example of that. But we have to get out and get to the polls this November. And believe it or not, that's only about 2 months away. 60, 65 days away. I'll be here in no time.
Yep, you're gonna get a full dose. Well, I could say an awful lot of things tonight that would be as inflammatory to the ears of our listeners as some of our speakers' comments are. He and I like each other. We are very friendly. Politically, we are exact opposites on most things. But let me answer a question first. Subject of Electoral College. Most people do not know what the Electoral College is. Nobody knows, most people don't know what the number of people in it are. What we did when we created our country, and there's some people who say, well, it don't matter how we created the country, we want to run it this way now. Well, you can think that, but you better have a gun. Because most of the conservatives, who own 300 million of them, We're not going to allow it. It's not going to happen. So that's my strong statement for tonight. But here's how the Electoral College was created. The members of the Electoral College elect our president exactly how the U.S. Congress governs this country. Except we allow 3 people from Washington, D.C. to come in and vote, and they don't vote in the Congress. In other words, the number of Electoral College people equal the number each state has. Now you can do away with that constitutionally if you get 2/3 of the vote, but you would probably have to do away with the Congress too and organize it some other way, because that is as logical as anything can be. They set it up for a reason. You know why we have Electoral College voters? They didn't trust the Congress members. This is kind of funny. They just said, you guys are going to get all entranced in there, and you're going to vote for who you want for rather than who your constituents told you to vote for. So we don't trust you, so we're going to have Electoral College members. So I could preach a sermon about that, but I hope that makes it clear. That's why it was created. It was created for our safety. So 3 million more people, 1 million of them were illegal, voted in California, voted for.
That's bullshit.
1 million is what they say. I don't know.
From what source?
Many articles. I read 200 articles a week from probably 35 publications. That includes the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Times Chronicle, the LA Times, a number of others. So I'm not poorly read. So all I can do is quote. None of us can know everything. We don't have time to go out and find out all this stuff. But what people are saying, and the news people are not disputing, you sort of have to say, well, that's probably right. Okay, Electoral College. Okay, the chart up here. The rate. Okay, I've used up my 5 minutes, so I'm going to be fast. The Republicans have very high votes. You know what taxes are taxed on? They're taxed on income and they're taxed on capital gains, mostly, and business profits. When Roosevelt needed to shoot the tax rates up during the Second World War, and he did. And guess what? Nobody wanted to take them down for a long time. JFK did the first good one. He shot the taxes way up, 94%. Our now deceased CPA used to come in here, would talk about that all the time. Guess what the people who own stocks did? They put them in the safe deposit box and they left them. They did not sell, they did not generate any taxes on them, and they didn't pay any taxes on them. So guess what? The taxes went down. They were only taxed on their income, and they minimized their income. So that was caused legislatively. When Kennedy, our first Catholic Democratic president, was elected into office for 2 years, he lowered the tax rates. Guess what the tax revenue went? It went up, up, up. Well, when Reagan was elected into office, he met with the head of the House. What's his name? And I can't remember his name, although I can see his face. They met. This was their agreement. The Republicans did not control the Congress, so they didn't lower the taxes. Reagan said, would you please lower the taxes? And the head of the Congress said, the head of the House said, we will lower the taxes, but we will lower the expenditures too. Guess what they did? They lowered the taxes. It brought in $4 trillion more dollars per year once they got out of the recession they were in right then after about a year. But the Democratic Congress pushed the spending up. So, politicians are politicians. I don't care if they're left or right. They lie to us, they steal from us, and about the best thing we can do is stand up for our best. And I don't care if they're left. I like Gene just as much as anybody on this planet. I respect his viewpoints. I don't agree with a lot of them because I've learned in a different way, in a different setting, even though I grew up in the union family. And my time has passed, and I will sit down, even though I won't talk another hour. Two subjects.
Okay, who's next?
I want to thank Gene for his presentation. I learned a lot tonight. When he mentioned the teacher's strike, I'm reminded that in Texas, I believe it's actually illegal for the teachers to strike. I think so. And if you do, you could lose your pension.
Sure could.
So it's quite a, what do you call that? Things don't jive. We're in a state where they say we don't want government control, yet they silence our voice.
Right.
Contradiction. I listen to public radio all day long, every day. And sometimes I hear the same programs twice and take notes. I'm learning a lot between this place and there. They have been talking about, they had a really, the part that I heard this week was about labor unions. And they were very pro-labor unions, saying we need labor unions. I didn't get to hear all of that one, but it would be worth our while to look that up. NPR, I believe it was the program on labor unions. The one thing that I wonder about, Gene, was your comment on immigrants. There's been multiple programs on there talking about how immigrants enrich our country. And someone, this is an anecdote, but someone was saying that outside of Baltimore, there were so many shellfish in the water that it was plugging up things and causing major problems because the people that usually harvest them were immigrants and they went back to Canada. And this week they did have a program on construction workers saying there is a huge shortage in construction workers, and this was not due to immigrants, it was due to the young men that usually go into it are now going to college. So if the immigrants could be employed in this would be a plus. And what else about immigrants? I don't know. I just know that a lot of things that I've read is saying we benefit greatly from having immigrants here. The one thing about employment, well, this week, a man named Juan, you can guess his nationality, the report was that he had gone to have his passport renewed, and they questioned his citizenship. He's lived his whole life in the United States. He was in the military, he was a border agent, and he works in a prison, one of the private prisons down by the border. And they questioned his citizenship because he was birthed by one of the midwives. You may have heard them talking about the midwife thing. Well, they said, you have to provide this, and this documents, which I don't think any of us would be able to provide. And he provided them. And still, they have detained him for deportation. This is an American citizen having their citizenship revoked. And this is done in the name of safety, and, so I'm pro-immigrant. The private prisons that President Obama was going to phase out the private prisons because they had so many violations, and officers were being shot, contraband, telephones, all kinds of stuff. Well, President Trump promised them that the private prisoners, people that own them in Texas, that he would double their population. And guess who goes there? The refugees that are convicted are being sent to the private prisons. And those private prisons are getting money from the government, but they're not employing any of the community. They're making the refugees do the work for $1 a day. Nobody in the community is being employed, but the refugees are getting $1 a day. And I did find out this week that Southern Poverty Law Center has Civil Liberties, ACLU, has a lawsuit over that now against the administration. So I would please ask Gene if he would share what he knows about if immigrants, what is the backing for saying that immigrants are taking our jobs? Thank you.
Who's next? Am I the last one standing? Someone else going to be in it? Susan, you want to go up there? Anybody? Nobody. You're union organizer over there, you want to say something? No? All right. I thought you might have something to say. Anyway, I'm the last one standing. I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. I thought he did a terrific job. Help us out. My background, I was a union representative for 20 years in Illinois, and I negotiated a 6-hour workday in the railroad industry, which never had been done before that I know of. But I look at, recently, just last week, I received a letter from Public Citizen. I don't have it with me today, but it was a diatribe about how bad it is that all these different agencies that are in the federal government have become compromised, and they're letting the corporations off the hook. They're taking away a lot of the regulations corporations had, and they're making it far, far worse than it was. And that it's going to be hard on workers. It's going to be good for corporations. So this is bad. And they're blaming Trump for this, that this is a bad thing, and he's a bad fellow with a black hat. Well, I wrote back that aside from that, we have corporate control of Congress. That's our real problem, and that corporations control the Congress. They control what goes on, and if the congressmen vote against the corporations, they're out. It's that simple. And they vote them out in the primaries, and they put somebody else in, and that's why our Congress is compromised. So I think that the answer to that, the real answer, is to recognize that Congress is whatever has to happen, Congress has to do it. That's the problem. What will Congress vote for? In my view, they'll vote for free airtime the last 90 days of the general election. Why? Because there's no history of a challenger being incumbent in this century. The challengers get nothing for contributions. I know that. And as a result, incumbents are owned by corporations. Well, if they were to have free airtime, the incumbent would get free airtime, and so would the challenger. And some challengers would beat some incumbents, and when that happened, everything would change. Congress would then represent the people who do the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then we could have some serious change that would work. Among that would be, Gene mentioned the fact that corporations are leaving town, they're going overseas, they're doing different things. He's against tariffs, but I think personally that the answer, part of the answer is tariffs on corporations that left the country. When they've left this country and gone somewhere else, they've gone to cheaper labor. The corporation is bigger than the country. That's what's happened. And we got corporatocracy. It's not a good thing. So I think that if we put tariffs on corporations that left the country, like Apple, they produce everything in China, they don't produce anything here. If they want to avoid paying the tariff, they can produce things here. They would have to pay the tariff. Then we'd have some jobs here. And if we had jobs here, then we could shorten the workday. We would have some muscle in labor unions. The labor unions have no muscle today because as soon as they ask for something, the corporation leaves town. They pack up everything and leave. And that's what the weakness of our unions have been for the last 30, 40 years. And that has to be addressed. Anyway, I better shut up while I'm ahead and give it back to Gene. Oh, thank you.
We cannot wait for the economies of the world to naturally balance out.
That's right.
I got that from a very prescient and keen, insightful person, and he's saying it right there. This was in one of the letters that Tom just handed me. If we're not going to get a natural balance out, just on things that people brought up, I agree with you. We are headed for fascism. We're headed for plutocracy. But remember, it's not either or. It's like there's a whole lot of plutocracy and a little bit of plutocracy, and we're somewhere in between, and things are changing. Nothing is static. Everything is changing. We're not out of democracy here. We still have a lot of democracy, and we better fight to hang on to it and fight to improve it. I don't think 1 million undocumented workers voted in the last election. I think if they had, it would have been in one of the lawsuits. It would have been in one of the lawsuits. You said it. I'm saying it. I don't think so. Somebody said they lied to us, they robbed us. I think that was Jim too. And I certainly agree with that. But it's not 100%. I mean, all politicians are not stealing and lying to us all the time. You know, some of the time, and some of them. So it's a matter of degree. I'm not sure if an individual teacher in Texas would lose their pension if they went on strike. They wouldn't.
I think it would just
That's what the organizer for the state workers says. Now, I think that the sanctions would be against the teachers' union. The sanctions would be against your union if you got state workers to go out. And you might be the one to go to jail if you call for it, but I don't think they would. And I want to add one more thing, and this is really, really important when you're talking about striking. You can do anything in a strike, whether it's legal or not. You can do anything. It all depends on whether or not you win. And I'm a good example of that. In 1984, the company at LTV said, if you refuse to work overtime, we are going to fire you because we have the right to do that, and we're going to do it. And they did. They fired 5 of us one morning. And then it was a walkout, and they fired 60 other people who were walking out. All 65 of us went back in there with back pay 13 months later. All 65 of us got our jobs back with back pay. The reason is because we won. So yeah, you can do anything in a strike if you win.
Yeah.
Don't do it and lose.
That's right.
So that's the trick. The trick is to win. Okay. Shortage of construction workers. When they start paying them more, they'll get more construction workers. And I think that pretty much answers. I agree with pretty much everything everybody said, including Jim. We're headed toward a plutocracy. We're headed for a period of time in which the money commands everything. But it's not a done deal. This is Labor Day. I want to end with a couple of songs. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So you pass out these songbooks. Inside the songbook, I asked for your email. So inside the songbook, you'll find my email. And if you would like to keep this songbook, you may. If you don't, leave it here. I'll get them. I got them for 15 cents each. So it's a pretty good deal. Now that's not fair. That's not fair.
Okay, I can make copies.
Okay, if you will turn to page 21, we will do what I consider to be the best song ever written. It was written in 1926 by a woman whose house was surrounded by the sheriff. The sheriff's name was J.H. Blair. And he surrounded her house trying to catch her husband, who was a union organizer. Her name was Florence Reese. She had the kids get under the bed because she was afraid the shooting was going to start. And one version I heard the shooting had already started, but I don't think that's really true. But she was afraid of shooting, so she had the kids get under the bed. She sat in the kitchen and wrote this on the back of a calendar. Oh, come all you good workers, good news to you I'll tell. It's about this good old union that's coming here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 My daddy was a miner, and I'm a miner's son. But I'll stick with this union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? Tell me. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Now we changed this one here. Instead of saying Harlan County, we said Dallas. They say in Dallas County, no neutrals there can be. You're either gonna be union folks or scabs for LTV. Which side are you on? 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 Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on? 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 Don't scab for the bosses. Don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got no chance unless we organize. So tell me, which side are you on? Which side are you on? One last time now. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Isn't that a wonderful song? If everybody knew which side they were on, they wouldn't have to have all these arguments about exactly what to do and all that. Now if you'll turn to page 4, we'll sing Labor's National Anthem, Labor's Anthem, Solidarity Forever. And you should at least get the verse on this. It's just solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong. We're going to do this in different chords. I want you to pay attention to the words though. Now, that's one reason I kind of like to see you take these home with you, because the words on this are really profound. But in 1915, there was a strike, a march in Chicago that was led by a Texan named Lucy Parsons, a woman named Lucy Parsons from Johnson County. And that was the first time this song was used, and it became the anthem for labor, so we all sing it now. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn. But without our brains and muscle, not a single heel could turn. Who will break their heart and power? We gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong. Sing it out now. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies, magnified 1,000-fold. We give free to earth a new world from the ashes of the old. Our union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. It is we who plow the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops into smiles the railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving, miss the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Our union makes us strong. That's pretty profound stuff, and pretty radical too. Did you get that part about all you that says that we will build a new world from the ashes of the old? I can hardly believe they sing that. The reason this song came from the industrial workers of the world, it didn't really come from the union.
Wow.
And you want to do Joe Hill?
Yeah.
I was going to do one other, but
Go ahead.
you want to do Joe Hill in between?
Yeah.
All right, what number is it?
18.
Oh, wait,
18.
18.
Okay, Joe Hill was a union organizer in the industrial workers of the world. Most of these songs did come from the industrial workers of the world. They were very good singers. And he was a piano player. And Joe Hill wrote songs. He didn't write this one. This was written after he was executed by a firing squad in Utah, I think in 1915. So I guess this must have been written in 1925. Well, so Joe Hill, there's a book called The Man Who Never Died. And that's because of this song. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. In Salt Lake Joe, by God, says I, him standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. Joe Hill ain't dead, he says to me. Joe Hill ain't never died. Where working folks are out on strike, Joe Hill is at their side. Joe Hill is at their side. From San Diego to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working strike and organize, says he, you'll find Joe Hill. Says he, you'll find Joe Hill. One more verse. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. Well, that's Joe Hill. I want to sing a song that's not in there because of what we've been talking about tonight. We've been saying that fascism is on the rise, that democracy is on the wane, and that we have to turn that around. Well, Woody Guthrie wrote a good song about fascism. Of course, this was during World War II, and he was talking about German fascism. But I'm sort of dragging it out again because of American fascists. So I think we ought to start this song again. The chorus you can sing, which it says, all you fascists bound to lose, all you fascists bound to lose, all you fascists bound to lose. Now I'm gonna tell you fascists, and you might get surprised. The working folks around this world are getting organized. You're bound to lose, you fascists, bound to lose. And I sing all you fascists bound to lose. All you fascists bound to lose. All you fascists bound to lose. Yeah. All you fascists bound to lose. You bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. There's people of every nation marching side by side, and they're marching across the field where 1,000,000 fascists died. You're bound to lose, you fascists, bound to lose. All you fascists, bound to lose, bound to lose. All you fascists, bound to lose. Bound to lose, bound to lose, you're bound to lose. You fascists, bound to lose. Race hatred that cannot stop us. That's the one thing I know. Your Jim Crow laws and your racist greed have really got to go. You're bound to lose. You fascists, bound to lose. Bound to lose. I'm going into battle. I'm gonna take my Union gun. We'll end this world of slavery. When this battle's won, we're bound to lose. You fascists, bound to lose. Oh, you fascists, bound to lose. Thank you so much for having me. And celebrate Labor Day with you. It's the 125th Labor Day.
Wow.
That's the end of our formal meeting, but they kick us out here at 10:30, and our speakers here are going to talk to them. So, that's it. See you next week, see you tomorrow.
No, the bottom.